Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us to this webinar hosted by the DXtera Institute. My name is Jeff Merriman. Today's webinar, the new data management landscape in higher education, we'll focus on a number of things. It's a very, full agenda. We'll try to get through it as quickly as we can. So before we begin, a few logistical things. This webinar will be recorded afterwards and view it or point it to your friends and colleagues. We have all attendees on mute. In fact, if some of the presenters could also mute. I'm hearing some noise in the background. But we'll be doing Q&A, and we ask that attendees please use the Q&A or chat features in Zoom here at the bottom of the screen. We will be monitoring Q&A and chat throughout the event, queuing up questions for later, perhaps actually answering some of the questions in real time, depending on the question. And then after the webinar, I will be sending out an email that will include a link to the recording that you can get to it and share with friends and family. Next slide, please. So real quick, the DXtera Institute, I think looking at the list, most of you kind of know what we're about. We're a membership organization. We have three principal priority areas. One around next generation education systems, promoting and helping people to develop them. One around integration solutions. And today's topic really is focused on the data management solutions, but we do encourage you to go to our website. Earlier this year, we did a lot of webinars around next generation systems, both with our NGBD conference, as well as working with Boston College to promote their new Eagle Apps SIS and to help build a community around that. So if you're interested in those topics, feel free to go there. Next slide. And while you're there, we encourage you to think about DXtera, think about joining us. Again, we're a membership organization. We can't do what we do without all of you. There are a number of benefits to membership. You're really investing in scalable solutions that are shared by the community. And we offer numerous opportunities to engage with the work we're doing. So please check us out. But with that, let's start moving on to today's topic. So we have a rich set of panelists today with a lot of background and experience in organizational change, data management, data governance, technology, what have you. We have Charles Ansell from the Community College System of New Hampshire, Matt Gee from Bright Hive. Both those organizations are members of DXtera. And from DXtera itself, we have Amoon Horn, Scott Thorne, and Mary Weiss. And so without further ado, to get going quickly here, I'm going to turn over the podium to Amoon to get us started.
Okay, just to begin with a quick overview, a lot of what you're about to see today is a result of multiple DXtera projects kind of primarily focused on a literature review around data usage and management, going back to kind of revisiting some of the studies going as far back as 2008 and 2012. This included some work with EDUCAUSE, Gardner, some of my personal work that I had done at Stanford, and the work that Scott and Mary had done at MIT. So this slide here is kind of a word cloud representing, based off of that literature review, a number of the common keywords and phrases that people were talking about when talking about data usage and data management. There are a number of trends that we're able to pull out of this. We kind of see that there is an increased desire for data, frustration around data access. There's a lot of talk around desire to use AI or automation to streamline various processes. There are data resource issues, particularly around personnel, increasing concerns around security, a desire to move towards a more data-driven organization and responsible data use. So those are just some of the many topics that we were running into. We were able to organize that into these three separate silos of conversation. So the one on the left, data proliferation, is talking about the increasing number of data sources and data feeds and how they interrelate with each other and how all of these present a management concern when we talk about all the ways that those can interact with each other and how do you get basically all the data and all the people on the same page. The middle block is really talking about data management and good data stewardship. So the real focus here is around the practices of data governance and management. Then on the far right, we're talking about more of the security concerns about based off of the changes that have been occurring, how does one responsibly use the institutional data at their disposal? So so all of this kind of ties together around data usage maturity models. Now this is an example of data maturity model, but part of the key is that there is a need for more process and more controls in place to use data more effectively, but all of that takes both process and work, and technology doesn't necessarily hurt, but it isn't necessarily a panacea in this space. And to talk a little bit about some of the issues around that data space, I'm going to hand things over to Charles Ansell from CCSNH.
Hey, everybody. As Jeff and Amun already stated, my name is Charles Ansell. I'm the Chief Operating Officer with the Community College System of New Hampshire. I'm just going to walk through a few slides of our background, non-technically, and then go into how our implementation of DXtera is going to be supporting a lot of our work. So our mission, like many higher education institutions, if not all of them, is around student success and access. We serve about 25,000 students per year. And our demographics changing a little bit. You know, you can see on the left-hand side, all of our locations. We're 7 separately accredited colleges, but we're part of one system. And then on the right, you know, we're skewing a little older and more part-time. You know, during the COVID pandemic, both those things are becoming, both those trends are accelerating. We're having even more part-time students and a lot of displaced workers who are going back to college with us. Can we go to the next slide? So our goal, and we stand by this goal, even at, you know, in fact, we're very much adhering to it, you know, during the COVID pandemic, where it's tricky to, you know, make sure that none of the great work that we've been doing on the student success front gets lost, as you know, so many people are, you know, really struggling to come to college in the first place or come back to college. But, you know, our goal is to make sure that we have 65% of New Hampshire residents with a educational credential of strong academic and workforce value by the year 2025. We know that that's what's required for our labor economy to be successful post-pandemic, and we are sticking to that and continue to make progress. If we go to the next slide, I can detail that a little further. So, you know, I wasn't sure which metric I would throw up here. You know, I just wanted to choose a bunch but not be overwhelming. But, you know, we've been doing very well on our total awards, as well as our graduation rate increases across multiple cohorts, whether you're looking at the 3-year, 6-year, or 8-year. We generally lead or are basically tied for the lead within the New England region. Not that it's a big competition, it's just a benchmarking fact. You know, so you can see that we've improved our 3-year grad rate over the last 5 years by more than a third. And while a lot of that has to do with our student success interventions, I would chalk most of it up to our performance management around key metrics, and our ability to be very fluent with data is obviously the crux of that. So if we go to the next slide. So all of our, you know, 65 by 25 strategic goals all have sub-objectives, and those in turn have KPIs. And I'm just sharing a couple of them here. Obviously, we've done this in other operational areas, but you can see what our key performance indicators are. And we know, you know, if we look at the top 2 set of KPIs, the assuring that our pathways lead to academic and career success in New Hampshire, you see we have median earnings and transfer post-completion, and, you know, the leading indicators of those around the graduation rates and total graduates. And I'm sure everybody's familiar with this sort of thing. But we drill in further, obviously, as I'm sure other institutions on this call do, into leading indicators of those, you know, and measuring them week by week to make sure that it all rolls back up to our mission. So if we go to the next slide. So one subset of our leading indicators are going to be how well we are progressing on our student GPS initiative. It's important that we put a stake in the ground and said, you know, pathways, you know, for us is, you know, a very real thing. It's not a fad or something like that. For us, it really means making sure that all of our programs up top have economic and transfer value, in particular into our public higher education system, the university system of New Hampshire, as well as meeting workforce needs of our major employer partners. But then on the bottom, from a success perspective outside of the curriculum, but more on the advising front, making sure that our pathways are relevant to individual student aspirations, that they have the appropriate math for the given major that they're in, that they're intentional and structured, that they're semester by semester in construction, that the courses are prescribed in every semester, and that students are registering onto education plans themselves. And then finally, that we are very responsible but mindful of the aggressiveness with which students make these academic plans and traverse them. So that's that pace to completion, making sure that if a full-time student wants to graduate in 2 years, that they're looking at the summer and that they're looking at taking at least 15 credits per semester instead of 12. That we innovate around developmental education, so that way students take all of their credits for credit towards graduation requirements and don't get stuck in traditional dev ed work. So if we go to the next slide. So this is, where we begin to tie in DXtera. A huge way that we get things done at CCSNH is that we always come back to our major metrics that I've just kind of walked through. And these have long-term outcomes and leading indicators, like I've mentioned on the left, right? So with our board of trustees, they might want to see every quarter where we're at on our KPIs. But the leading indicators that go more to our operations, we dialogue around that with different job families to make sure that we are always pursuing as best we can the things that will move the needle on the bigger goals, right? So if I shifted gears and moved out of student success and went into finance, we're always looking at our reserves ratio, our debt coverage, and the diversity of our revenue sources on a weekly basis, and getting our CFOs together to make sure that we're always comparing and contrasting and sharing best practices. But obviously, the ability to have the data to fulfill all these metrics is critical if this becomes a truly cultural change in the broadest sense. So if we go to the next slide. So where are we with our data? So it lives in disparate systems. Few people understand the data. The different data elements are reported out differently, and crosswalking is rarely possible. I'm speaking a little starkly. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of nuance to this as we make progress to the bottom half, which is looking to where we want to be in terms of central storage and infrastructure that makes sense and is extensible as our technology portfolio broadens, making sure that all the data that we have siloed off come together in a data warehouse, and that we have really good inexpensive data exchange so we can run cutting edge real-time analyses. So we go to the next slide. So this is essentially, eventually I got tired of making all the silos on this slide, but I mean, obviously we've got, it's demoralizing to just even do the exercise of illustrating it. So, but obviously we've got a lot of different data silos, and our goal here is through the DXtera framework of interoperability with the connectors to be able to not just have data go between these systems, but to have them go through a warehouse that's essentially shielded by the connectors. So then that way it's very easy to collect all the data that we need, and then surface out what's not seen here is take all that data and then throw it up to the presentation layer, where we use an assortment of tools, but mostly Excel and Rapid Insight. But the idea is that we have our data warehouse with a star schema based design such that the data cubes that represent the most commonly asked data questions are being surfaced across multiple systems, such that when we get reports on the metrics that we were talking about that support our student objectives and our financial objectives all the way up to our mission, that we're able to do it in a very fluent way, and that it's all seamless top to bottom. And then finally, that last bullet there, we want to eventually make sure that we're able to federate systems, perhaps with the university system, perhaps with our K-12, perhaps with other partner agencies within New Hampshire. Now we've got a lot of, privacy things going on in a way that's somewhat unique to our state, but we're pretty optimistic that if we can get our house in order in this way, we can lead the way and role model what other agencies in our state should be doing. So if we go to the next slide. So this kind of, wraps things up. But the idea is that in making this all work, we need to have professional development around all the different tech tools, and particularly the data flows that are behind them. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody's going into the warehouse or is really that data fluent, but the idea is that they have a rough conceptual idea of what's happening, such as what you've seen in the prior illustration. And that they're fluent in these reports. And this all becomes obviously much more critical during the pandemic. Obviously, when all of our instruction has gone remote and all of our operations have gone remote, it truly is an opportunity to not only provide a superior learning experience by having the heightened technology that we never had in terms of our online learning, but to bolster our ability around that sort of performance dialogue that I was talking about earlier, since everybody's going to be going between systems and monitoring these flows of data. And as all of our instruction is increasingly or almost entirely online, the data on student learning is going to be far more robust because all the interactions are digitally tracked. So, we want to make sure that DXtera is a part of our full capability to make the most out of the superior remote operations in a way that we honestly hadn't really thought about or planned for. And that's an ongoing conversation that that we're going to have and that we're having internally with our college. But I didn't really kind of summarize the bullets on this slide, but hopefully you had a chance to read them, because it does kind of summarize the stuff that was talked about earlier. And in the interest of time, I want to keep things going. So with that, I'll turn it back over, and I'll follow Jeff and Amun's lead in terms of any questions that would be pertaining to my section of this webinar. Okay, so I'm done with my portion.
Amun, are you muted? Yeah.
Yes. I think that provides a good description of a lot of the trends that we've had around this that we've been talking about so far. I want to hand things over to Scott to talk a little bit about our process in the solution space.
Hi, this is Scott Thorne. Well, we're going to be talking about a bunch of trends, and one is data proliferation, but also there's a lot more people using data, and a lot increasing expectations are coming from those users. And one way to think about it is having an analogy to a farm-to-table restaurant, to sort of think from the consumer's point of view. If you were using information, what would you want to the characteristics to be? You want to know, when did it create it? How did it get to me? Did something happen to it along the way? And this is becoming, in the past, just getting any kind of data was the first job, but people are getting more sophisticated all the time, and fixing these data problems is a long slog. And using an analogy like farm to table really helps give you a perspective from the consumer point of view to drive a data strategy, because people want not just the data, but they want to know that they can trust it. Why don't you go to the next slide there? So, with that in mind, you need to design your data infrastructure so it's transparent, so people know where the data comes from, what it means, how to use it, what's been done to it along the way, in order to trust and really get the most out of your data. If you just have a number and don't know what's been done to it up to that point, has been filtered or grouped in a special way that you're not aware of, you can't really take advantage of the data that you really should. This is just it. It's just a frame, a way to think about data. Oftentimes, people don't think as data consumers, and it's good to do that to help set your data strategy. So next slide, I'll turn this back to Amun.
Okay, so part of the key here is that there are a number of that we've outlined these three trends: data proliferation, data stewardship, what is good data practice, and responsible use of institutional data. We're now going to be going to dive into these trends to talk a little bit more about them and some of the solutions that we have in these spaces. I'd like to hand things off to Matt G to begin the conversation around data proliferation.
Great, and I'm just going to motivate this lightly and at a high level, so we can have the real experts at DXtera kind of talk about the cool stuff they've been working on and how to solve for it. So I'm going to start by saying we're using the wrong metaphor in the data world, and I blame the economist for this. But data is not the new oil for all sorts of reasons. If you go to the next slide, primarily one being that unlike oil, data has combinatorial value, right? 1 barrel plus 1 barrel equals 2 barrels of oil. One data set plus another data set is actually a lot more than 2 data sets. You get all of the unique combinations and insights that can come out of those combinations. And that is one of the reasons why, right, we should thank Aristotle for thinking about how we should think about databases and data management generally in the kind of data proliferation world. And that is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So what does that mean for in higher education? So if you go to the next slide, you know, this is not unique to post-secondary. But Dane Atkinson has this great quote where he talks about, you know, the real impact of data lying at the intersection of different data sets. So when we think about the value that all of you as institutions are wanting to generate on your data, how you're wanting to inform your strategic decision making, and how you want it to improve your student experience, almost always the answer to that lies at the intersection of 2 or more data sets rather than a single one. And the challenge, if you go to the next slide, is that that intersection keeps getting larger and larger. So this was a survey that we were involved in along with some other partners. We asked over 1,000 different practitioners in the post-secondary and workforce space, as well as K-12, what their top challenges were on a daily basis, and how information might be able to help them meet those challenges. And just looking at the top 20 questions for practitioners in the post-secondary space, an example of that being which credentials are making a difference for underserved opportunity seekers in the workforce, right? So how much does post-secondary education exposure increase wages for underserved communities? Just that question, right, required connecting data from a variety of sources within post-secondary institutions as well as outside of. And if you look at just the top 20 questions that were the most in demand from practitioners in post-secondary education, requires over 2,500 data connections to answer those 20 questions. So go to the next slide. And one of the challenges as each of your institutions grow, right, this is just in SaaS applications, the more sources of data you're generating, right? So just as institutions increasingly, and this is old data, the updated version of this data is actually going to show the bars much higher with the digital transformation in education accelerated by the COVID crisis. The sheer number of applications that each institution is using has grown actually fairly dramatically over the last 6 months. So if you go to the next slide, and just to complicate the picture even more in terms of data proliferation, you don't have to just worry about your own data and the data that you purchase as major systems. Students now are increasingly bringing their own, complex digital world with them, and have expectations around that digital world. And again, this has only been accelerated and made even more complex by the current crisis. And so when we talk with institutions across K-12, post-secondary, and workforce, we find that often the most relevant quote, if you go to the next slide, is an old riff on Sam Coleridge, data everywhere and not a thought to think. And so that's how I contextualize and think about this data proliferation problem. And if only there was an organization that was thinking hard about how to solve that at scale for post-secondary institutions.
And with that, I'm going to head over to Mary to talk a little bit about some of the impacts around data proliferation.
So as Matt says, what happens if you don't have a central repository or warehouse that contains connected data from multiple systems? Then data silos happen, right? Data becomes proliferated for many reasons. Could be because of the structure, the political atmosphere in the organization, growth, vendor lock-in. Structurally, if data is hard to get at or not easily accessible for reporting, or people don't have access to report on the data is often moved or sent to multiple places for people, which causes people building more silos, more chances for people to modify the data and share it beyond themselves. The old adage, you know, spreadsheets are our friends, right? If I don't have the data and somebody else does, well, I'll get it from them and they share it to me via a spreadsheet. And this all leads to a host of problems, which we'll discuss later. But also lack of data sharing rules often leads to political dispersion of data, right? As the owner of the data, I choose to hold the data tight and produce reports for people, which turnaround time may be slow, may not really understand their question. They might not even be asking the right question, right? Or someone I know and trust can have the data, but others can't. So again, that causes people to share data amongst themselves. They change it, they augment it. They may not understand the data. They might not understand the rules around it, right? So systems of record grow over time too, and data may be purged, but people still need to report on it or access it historically. So they take it, they store it themselves, and again, share it as needed. If a vendor locks down their system and it can only be accessed within their application or using their tools, data is usually extracted, stored in many mediums by many people. All of these reasons lead to various silos of data, which then need to be reconciled. Reconciliation takes resources and time. If the data has been modified or augmented, it's hard to reconcile. Have you ever heard of, senior executives often ask a question of an organization, and many times they get multiple or conflicting answers? How is that possible? It's one of the reasons is the multiple silos, the distribution of the data, because the data could have been modified or augmented. The people might not misunderstand the data, that have it, or don't understand the business rules or context surrounding it. This all leads the organization and users to lose faith in the data and call it unreliable. Scott, do you want to talk a little bit more?
Sure. So, it's obvious that there's more data than we can possibly handle. And so the most important part of any data strategy is to focus on what's most important. And Matt brought it up with those 20 questions and how many pieces of data it takes to answer those 20 questions. Well, every institution should know what their most important questions are, those 20 questions that sort of should guide their data strategy, because frankly, inside a modern system like an SIS, there's a lot of data that has to do with running the system, which isn't really business data that you care about. So it's really important to drive your data collection and data access based on what's the most important questions to get answered. And because that shrinks the space you have to deal with. You don't have to pay special attention to all data, just the data that supports those top questions. So if you haven't done it already, you really should have it well understood what those top 20 questions are. And if seem obvious, well, it's quick to write them down then. And that should really, it takes a long time to get all the data pipelines in place. So you should have something like your high value questions that really guide your effort. And we think that's one of the most important things to do up front. And it doesn't cost a lot of money to get started down that track. And the good news is a lot of the nouns in higher ed, like students, programs, courses, degrees, we all know what those terms mean. And most of our questions are actually going to use those kinds of terms. So the questions shouldn't be something mysterious. They should be critical and well understood by everybody before you start engaging in a data strategy. Next slide. So because this sort of gives a schematic of DXtera's solutions here, because we know the names of common nouns like student, course, degree, term, we can create a model that answers some basic questions and take information from disparate sources and bring it over and bring it into this model that's well integrated. And each little piece has to be identified and slotted into the right place to make that model whole and well integrated. But that's the whole key here, is that, you know, all the questions we want to ask, they're not really mysteries. There are a lot of the same ones, and we can benefit as a community by identifying those and tailoring our solutions to those core things. Next slide there. So it sort of repeats what I was saying. We've been working on this comprehensive modeling of the higher ed institution for a lot of years now, and we've tried it in multiple contexts. And it turns out that these models hold up very well, and most people, most systems and so forth can fit in a model, even though everybody does things a little bit differently. The general idea that students take courses and earn degrees is pretty universal, and allows us to leverage that to make more common solutions. Next slide. I guess that's...
So we have a few solutions in this space. In particular, one of the main pieces that Scott was just talking about is that we've been working with the OSID data model, which is a comprehensive enterprise data model for higher education. This is a unified model covering everything from courses and programs to finance data, HR and payroll, HR and personnel, and all of these are openly available, but we are using these as a unified enterprise higher education data model of which everything can get translated into to represent everything in a common fashion. What this means is that whether we're talking about working with PeopleSoft, or Banner, or Ellucian, or Genzabar, or Workday. In all of these cases, we are able to translate them into a common language that has a common set of reporting models around it, and a common ways to describe and understand the interrelationships between them. All of this is based around a set of data connectors that we have built out. Each of these data connectors ties to a particular system. This can include a student information system such as Banner. It can include HR and personnel coming, for example, right now through PeopleSoft. We are looking to move forward with things in the LMS space, and we have certain pieces that we've built out in finance. All of these things come together by providing a means to basically extract from these core systems, or really translate from these core systems and bring them into the common model. And as a result of this, we were able to build out an associated data hub that provides a means to aggregate that operational data and then translate it into a unified data warehouse. We're currently in the process right now of building out a cloud solution based around this, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that later. When we talk about good data practice, a lot of what we're talking about is both how people can use the data and how to keep data from both falling into the wrong hands or how it can be effectively utilized. One of the concerns that we often see is that we wind up with a collection of users who rely on other users in order to be able to use the data effectively. They have to prepare a set of questions and then hand it off to a set of experts for them to go through and do all sorts of data archaeology in order to be able to identify how all these elements come together. This is a very inefficient system that continues to grow in complexity and requires more and more expert talent in order to move forward. Part of what we're talking about is data democratization, of finding ways to kind of streamline these processes. I'm going to hand this over to Scott to talk a little bit more about good data stewardship.
Well, the main thing about working with data is that it really takes a long time and a lot of effort over a number of years to really affect change in an organization, get an organization to where you want it to be, looking at that data maturity, going back to the data maturity slide. Well, everybody starts off just, you know, any old place, but it's a matter of how can you move everybody in your organization, not just the IT systems, but your users further along the curve so they're better at using data and can use it fluently. And since the effort takes quite a long time and a long investment, and people come and go, there's a lot of things to distract you along the way. And one of the best things to do is just write down some data policies and principles that you agree to at your institution. Now, some people already have done this, but you should think about, do you have it written down so that a new employee coming to your institution knows how they're expected to treat data and what to expect? If you don't have some agreements about how you should behave and which way you're headed to, then it's going to take you longer to get there. And again, it's something that doesn't take an awful lot of effort and doesn't need to be revisited all the time, but it helps keep you on track. So the next slide. So here's some examples of some common best practices. And you know, you should come up with your own list at your own institution, but you know, some of these are pretty common sense. And so, you know, it should only take a few hours to write down what things are everybody at your institution really agrees to and publish it out and give your data effort a direction. A lot of times the effort to get better data usage at an institution isn't given to a sole individual. It's everybody around the institution needs to do a little bit. And so they need some guiding principles and statements to help them think about things. And next slide. And here again, here's some policies. These are example policies about data ownership and privacy and how to use data. And you know, again, they're meant to be sort of the backbone of your data strategy over a long period of time. These things can, if you write them down, can guide your effort for a decade, even as technology and people are turning over. But it's really good to sit down and do this bit. So, and if, again, this is for a future session, but if people, you know, need help thinking about this or how to do that, you know, DXtera is here to help people or different places in their data maturity. And some people have done this work and some people are way past it. But if this is something you're struggling with and we could help, just holler. So I'll turn it back over to Moon.
Okay, so this slide talks a little bit about the cost of poor data management and how the limits that result, the lack of awareness, the inability to answer key business questions, the handling data quality issues and things along those lines. these solutions that we have in place are really focused around providing means to streamline the management of that work. So when we talk about data warehouse models, we have a collection of models in place that are designed for end user access, or that is our goal, is to get as much built out as possible to kind of cover a lot of the common need cases. There will always be a certain amount of expert use cases that are going to be required, but a lot of our focus with the data warehouse has been to have consistent, repeatable models that would allow for self-service reporting to allow more people to get at the data themselves. In addition, we have built out a collection of tools in this space around data governance and metadata management that are really focused around having a data dictionary, providing data lineage and data cataloging, and also identifying information about the necessary authorizations required to access a particular collection of data. I'm going to hand this back over to Matt G to talk a little bit more about the responsible use of institutional data.
Great, thanks, Eamon. Again, I'll just add a little bit of sizzle, but not a lot of steak, and leave it to the DXtera folks to give the real content. At Bright Hat, we spend a lot of time talking with folks about responsible data use and data sharing in a variety of different communities. And one of the things, perhaps unsurprising for a lot of folks on this call, is how those conversations have really elevated in importance as a result of the pandemic. We have seen a number of instances where both the responsible use of data is critical to helping save lives, helping folks get the education that they need and have paid for, get back to work with jobs they've lost, and where those same data sharing and data use initiatives within institutions and across institutions have are under increasing levels of scrutiny. And if you go to the next slide, a quick example of this are profiles like this, right? Under a watchful eye, colleges are using big data to attract students in an effort to boost graduation rates, but it comes at a cost. You are seeing the public discourse around responsible data use at institutions of higher education reach a fever pitch, and that's an excellent thing, and also a really challenging thing to be involved in and be part of, as many of the institutions here are. What does responsible data use mean? Well, if you go to the next slide, it doesn't simply mean FERPA compliance. If there's anything that the rapid digital transformation of education has taught us, is that our regulatory frameworks for data and data management are pretty out of sync with the complexity of today's digital landscape. And this is highlighted by this pre-COVID 2018 article by Kurzweil and Stevens, where they really hit on our central point, right? That at present, the domains of EdTech and learning analytics are without commonly shared routines for adjudicating conflicts of interest in data use between academic uses, commercial uses, and scientific purposes. And it's the trade-offs that institutions face in making decisions around data use between their platforms and providers, the different stakeholders that could use the data, that do use the data, who are represented in the data, who are stewards over the data, right? All of those trade-offs and the fuzzy lines between the costs and the benefits of any particular data use are where, frankly, the regulatory frameworks aren't much help. And so it's up to each of us as institutional data stewards to do the hard work of figuring out what responsible data use means in our context. Maybe a meme-worthy way of capturing the moment, if you go to the next slide, is that FERPA is having its kind of okay boomer moment with a lot of ed tech. If you go to the next slide, but I think the good thing is many folks on this call and outside this call are very actively involved in the rapid renegotiation of our social contract around data, and what it means to be a responsible data steward at your institution, as well as what it means to be responsible, to show up for responsible data use conversations that impact not just your institution, but the ecosystem as a whole. And I think that's the really exciting moment that we're in. So if you go to the next slide, some of those things being negotiated rapidly and in real time are looking beyond compliance, obviously baking data ethics into your data use policies. I imagine this will be one of the things that we discuss. A realization that people are more important than the tech around data, and that investing in your institution's emerging data roles like data steward or chief data officer, and a variety of other key issues. I won't walk through all of these, but a lot of rethinking of things, kind of historically nailed down things like consent and identity, and trust and control and participation in governance. And I think that, to me, is the most exciting and important thing, is that we are all kind of participants. We're all at least invited to be participants in the active conversation going on right now on how we rethink responsible data use in an increasingly digitized era. So that's what we observe as key as kind of motivations for this critical trend. And I'll pass it back over to the DXtera team to talk us through how we do it responsibly.
So I'm going to hand things off to Mary.
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry, I was on mute. So different types of data have different rules and regulations surrounding it. Rules within your own institution, sponsor rules, agencies such as FERPA or HIPAA, etc. If you don't have policies and practices for the use of data written down and agreed to, what happens when you're audited or you have a data spill or security breach? As part of any good practice, organizations should be able to answer the question, who accessed what data when and for what reason? If the data exists in multiple silos, is stewarded by multiple parts of the organization, or there's no steward, which is even worse, or there's no written data usage or sharing policy or any central way to audit access control, it's hard to answer those questions. It's actually virtually impossible. So it's critical that every organization document their usage for access and data retention policies. This means you have to decide if people can share via spreadsheet or other methods, what's allowed and how it's controlled. And if people are sharing that data, they need to understand the liabilities and the rules for sharing. If you're sharing it with a third party, you need to legally document and have something that spells out exactly what their usage is. This includes hosted solutions as well. Amun, do you want to continue?
So here at DXtera, we have a number of solutions that we're working on in this space. Probably the first and most obvious one is, of course, our authorization management solution, which is currently tied to our data warehouse, but it provides a means to identify exactly which users have access to which elements of data. In addition, the metadata management tool can help people understand the implications of the data that they have access to. Along with this, we have a business rules management tool that we are using to basically provide a means to do automated notifications so that people can identify where there might have been, for example, some sort of a rules violation in regards to acceptable use. This screen here is what we've been driving to, is all of these different solutions tied together with this roadmap that's going out into next year. You'll see that we've started talking about the data warehouse and data source connectors. We've talked about data governance, and all these things that you see on this chart here are basically talking about ways that people can get involved and work with us today around some of these issues. So how can you get involved? You will see that at the end of this presentation, we're going to have an email address. And in addition, along with that, we're going to have in the post webinar email that's going to get sent out, access to our associated community. And at both of those points, you'll be able to dive in and get directly involved with some of the work that we're actively doing to give you some examples of that, right now we are currently working on moving forward with some of the PeopleSoft HR integration work. But in addition, we are looking right now for partners to work with us to identify what sort of LMS connectors the overall member base would like. So this includes things like Canvas, D2L, things along those lines. And we're basically trying to identify for Q4 what LMS we would like to move forward with. Likewise, in Q4, we're also looking to identify what is the next student information system that we're going to be moving forward with building connectors for. We already have plans for building out connectors for Eagle Apps, which is our student information system here that we have built in partnership with Boston College in Q1 of next year. In addition, when we talk about data warehouse, we have a whole collection of projects that we're looking to involve people with. So right now we are currently working with CCSNH around the student course and program information, as well as the financial aid. We are working with the University of Hawaii around the HR and personnel client proof of concept. We are moving forward with a cloud data hub and data warehouse beta instance that we're hoping to have up in Q4, and we're looking for members to get involved working with us to basically load data and interact with it and see how well that works to meet their needs. And I wanted to take a moment to kind of drill in on, in Q1 of 2021, we have an open slot. What we're looking for there is to identify the ways that some of the problems that people have that they need data to solve and how we can work with them in order to build out the necessary solutions. Finally, we have our data governance work. This includes a proof of concept of our business questions and metadata management tools. So right now we have a business questions proof of concept that we're looking to do starting in September, starting actually in the August timeframe right now. In addition, as we head into the October, November, December timeframe, we're going to be talking about our metadata management tool, which is also going to be a cloud solution that we are looking to move into beta. And then finally, also in Q4, we're going to be looking to do a proof of concept around automated monitoring and integrity checking. So a lot of this is around taking our business rules engine and using it to build out ways to do like integrity checking and then deliver notifications by a variety of means, whether those are SMS, email, various messaging forms. Part of this is trying to identify how people can use these business rules components. So at this point, I want to open things up to questions. Lauren, Jeff, were you able to see any questions there?
Yeah, we had one that Matt was kind enough to answer online, but I actually might throw it also, put Charles on the spot. We had a question regarding states' efforts to manage data silos and do better sharing and data reporting. I would imagine across a state. And I know, Charles, I don't know how you'd rate New Hampshire. And full disclosure, I live in New Hampshire, so I'm one of those. I'm one of those non-taxpayers because we don't do that. That can help Charles do this. But I guess, Charles, do you have any thoughts on the on what your vision would be for like a state of New Hampshire? Maybe a little more detail what you talked about earlier.
Well, so there's two different ways from my perspective, at least, that these silos get created, right? One is functional silos. So say our finance data is separate from our student data, so it's hard to understand specific metrics around, say, the cost per student enrollment for a given program. And then you have the other siloing, which is across colleges within our system. And of course, the two can crosshatch. And I would say that with the colleges, we have less of that as an issue because we did two things in the last few years that helped a lot. So one is our main student information system and our finance system, as well as our HR system. We have taken all of them and we got rid of the 7 separate instances of these transactional systems and made just one. So when you do the legwork to make sure your actual operational systems are all one across our across our colleges, that really helps to prevent colleges having separate data. But then you've got the reporting out of it and making sure that we've got common metrics definitions. And a lot of that goes back to what was discussed earlier around data governance and the implications around data dictionaries and making sure that that's all common and shared and understood. The thing that has really helped move that along, however, is not just or even so much those sorts of tools, which are important, and I would never, advise contrary to their development, but having that kickstarted by having a common reporting procedure to iPads, because we all need to report to iPads across pretty much all the most important metrics in all of our functional areas. Well, if we do that consistently across the system, then a lot of the common definitions around metrics and how we source the data to supply the answers in a consistent way end up getting solved just by necessity of doing compliance reporting as a function centrally. So just to recap, I would say one, having solving around the operational transactional systems is huge because that's what produces your data. Two, doing compliance reporting, particularly with iPads, has been critical. And then three is everything else that's then been said about moving towards consensus by solving data issues themselves through data governance and writing up common policies, procedures, and dictionaries.
Great, thanks. That was a question from Chanel Watson. Another question from Shannon Stockton. How do you address data collection gaps due to disparities in business processes between departments or campuses or presumably other organizations? So I don't know if anybody wants to take on that.
I can take a stab at it to kick it off. I have definitely found, that the way to do this is you want to make sure that we have a firm, strong understanding of what our metrics are and that the data will follow. So if we said, for example, and this actually is something that there's other people on this call who would understand this very well, is that at my prior workplace at the City Colleges of Chicago, we wanted to track how many students were on education plans. And that was difficult because we didn't actually have an automatic advising tool for semester by semester education planning for our students. So we made sure that we started reporting out how many plans we found in our advising tool through, basic upload of basic advisor materials. And that was super clunky and a massive headache. But what it did was, one, everybody just started filling the data gap because they didn't want to report out that they had no students on education plans. And then two, to make sure the data is quality, there was a big push to upgrade our systems. Then we did end up going with a homegrown education planning tool. So that example is a little clunky, but the point is, I find that the gap gets closed when you start demanding and sharing across your system the performance against a metric, because then people aren't satisfied with not available or zero. And then the discussions and the right performance dialogue emerges that ends up closing the gap by both sheer legwork and buying systems to automate the legwork.
And I think that mirrors a lot of what Scott had been talking about earlier in regards to identifying the business questions you're trying to solve. And that does provide a driver, as you were saying, Charles, does provide a driver in order to move forward in regards to an impetus to find the data that is missing and find ways to fill that gap.
And entering into a process where you're really defining data strategies, I assume that would be helpful, especially when one is doing that across an organization or a system.
Yes.
Let me see if any other questions are coming up. One thing I'll just do as a comment, I saw Phil Long was on the call. We were having some conversations about another one of DXtera's initiatives. We call the Learner Record Gateway Project, and Amun highlighted one of our project areas, which is authorization, and he mentioned that authorization, the authorization services that we've developed have to date been tied primarily to our data reporting activities, but what we're looking at with the Learner Record Gateway Project is to begin to experiment with, look at how we might apply those authorization technologies in an environment where students may have access to share their academic records. Obviously, this bumps into a lot of policies and laws, but what we're looking to do with our members who are running our integration framework, whether it's for the data warehouse or something else, is to look for members who would be interested in running a proof of concept with us on what would it mean to apply authorization in an environment where a student could actually make a determination to share their record from where it sits in an academic system of record. So just a comment on that. A few more moments for any more questions. Phil says, at the beginning, that might be getting official consent to act on, thanks Phil, on credential data, yes. Any other questions from our participants? If any come in while we're wrapping up, I'll mention that I want to thank our speakers for actually running through a lot of information very, very quickly. I was very worried we would not end this on time. I think we gave ourselves an hour and 15 for this. I might be wrong, but I guess I'll ask first of all, any of our hold on. There's another question in the Q&A section. Thank you, Charles. I missed that. I'm not doing my job. From an anonymous attendee. Do you think we will see a shift in institutional data usage to make up budget shortfalls created by COVID rather than on student success initiatives? Any thoughts on that question? Would you like to tackle?
Yeah, I mean, I can try to tackle that. So for sure, I mean, I guess it all depends on where your institution is at, right? And I can only speak for mine, I guess, but I think, well, so first, you'd get budget shortfalls in a couple different ways. Your enrollment revenue goes just as likely, if not more likely. Your public appropriation dwindles if you're at a public system. And I imagine that the marriage between the student success and the finance data would be pretty important to defend the return that you get on the student success initiatives. And I think that, I mean, it just depends. Like when I think, in full disclosure, right? If I look at our own, major areas of spend, right? We're like 80% payroll. And if we were to be down 20%, the math wouldn't work such that we wouldn't have to be talking about people. So then the question is like, well, how are you taking the angle on this? Is it that you're going to be looking at your different academic programs? Are you going to be looking at, different job families? And I guess it just comes down to like how closely linked your overall institutional strategic plan is to the budget, right? Because if there's a disconnect there where, essentially, the budget is just the dollar sign version of the implementation of your strategy. So if there's any disconnect, then you risk, whether it's student success initiatives or something else, your highest priority items could get cut despite stating that they're your highest priority items. So I think, being able to connect financially to your student success mission, whether that's through efficiency metrics like cost per award, or simulating return on investment from different student success initiatives, or some other way to bring those together. If you don't have that, then it's going to probably be whoever's the loudest when budget discussions occur. But I'm extrapolating from just my own experience, and I don't pretend to do too much with a broad brush there.
Anyone else have a thought on that? Long just posted question. Have you done data governance models for data stores that are aggregated across institutional consortia? This is not just access to the like, but it is not just access to the like, but in terms of who is able to become a part of the consortium. How are costs fiscally shared? What are the methods for achieving consensus from one group, one vote, to liquid democracy models, to ... question mark. There's a lot packed in there. And Charles says, not in New Hampshire, too much statute in the way. I haven't seen that. I don't know if Matt, is Matt still on? I don't know if Matt has some thoughts on that from the perspective of the things Bright Hive is up to.
By the way, Jeff, you were saying what everybody wrote in the chat, so can you laugh out loud to express LOL?
Phil Long says, is Matt still on, or did we lose Matt? I know he had a tight timeline.
Matt had to step off.
Okay. Thank you, Phil. It wasn't quite your laugh. I do have your laugh in my head because Phil and I worked together for a long time, but I can't recreate it.
So we've had some experience working with a consortium model. Mary, you've worked with, I believe, with Audi before, yes?
With Audi and Kofi, Audi is a subset of AIR groups, and typically they have their own model for how they share data and what's expected of their groups. And yes, it is written down.
Okay.
But don't forget that when the data goes to them, it's generally summarized data.
That's part of the thing is a lot of this does get made easier with summarization, de-anonymization, those sort of processes.
Right. It's definitely aggregated. It's not at the end. In most cases, it's not at the individual faculty member or the individual student level.
Which can sometimes pose problems if you need to do some sort of peculiar cross-section longitudinal analysis that may, for example, involve the demographics of either the instructor or the student. It's not really something you can do at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that kind of aggregation also speaks to this the farm to table problem, right? So how is that aggregation done, and is that process at least transparent? People know where that might be coming from.
Yeah, the better
Okay.
you've got your access rules defined, the more people can see and work with the raw data rather than having to only be satisfied with a summary. But doing all that access control work to really get it right at the detail level is time consuming at best.
And it does roll up as we start talking about what is the acceptable use for that data across institutional contexts.
Okay, well, it seems like we've run out of questions. Do you want to go to the next slide? This is just to remind you that we're here, and we do have an email address, data@DXtera.org, if you want more information or want to connect with the team that's doing all this work, or have a project that you'd like to try to launch with us. We are all ears. We're very excited to do work in this space. And I think as some of Moon's last slides indicated, you know, there's a lot of stuff on our plate, but we're also trying to keep some capacity open to begin to move into some new data areas and with some new data connectors. And for those who don't know, the data connectors we talk about that are based on the OSID models that we touched on earlier, you know, we designed those to be reusable. So once we do a data connector for a particular product, let's say, you know, PeopleSoft HR, that then becomes a reusable piece of code that can fit into an integration framework and do things like load the data hub and data warehouse. So, you know, work with DXtera, you know, we think of this as a lot of this work is really contribution by those of you who are trying to solve problems, not just to solve your own problem, but to have shareable artifacts that more and more people can use. We are planning to begin up a series of presentations and activities specifically around data management solutions and data management community, kind of like we've started around next generation products. We are planning to do a quarterly roadmap update in December, so stay tuned for that. And we're also trying to launch some weekly quote unquote office hours sessions, particularly for DXtera members, starting next month to begin to increase the dialogue around how people are using our solutions or to help us prioritize some of the directions around that. I don't know if you have anything more to say around that, Amun.
Not at this time, sorry.
Okay. And then again, please visit DXtera.org. All the stuff we talked about today will be up there, and this webinar will also be posted. So stay tuned for that. So with that, oh wait, we've already answered that question. Okay. So with that, thank you guys very much, and we hope to talk to you at an upcoming webinar or perhaps an in-person event sometime in the future. Wouldn't that be nice? Thank you very much.